My name is Carl S. Riedell. I live in Osterville, and I've lived there all my life, except the times I was in college and in the service. I think the best memories I have, I've thought of it a little bit, is the freedom in which I had to explore and to do almost anything without any restrictions. When I was brought up in the village of Osterville, we'd leave the house in the morning after breakfast and we'd come back when it got dark. We always had lunch at somebody's house, you know, peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of milk. And we were basically allowed to roam. And so we got to know all the backwoods and the roads, and we got to know the people, the old people, you know, met our friends. Everything was in walking distance. The school was in walking distance. It was a very peaceful place with very few interruptions, and it was a community in which, I don't know if you have it today, but you know, we had the Osterville Village School, which was right down the street from my house. And we'd walk there in the morning, we'd walk home for lunch. They didn't have a cafeteria like they do today in schools. Then you'd come back after an hour, and at 3 o'clock you got out and you walked home again. And really, there was no hovering helicopter over you at all times, wondering, you know, where is he and when is he going to get home? That's what I liked about it, and the fact that in Osterville, you know, most of the people had their own. They were service type people. My father was a plumbing and heating contractor, and it was usually a small, maybe 2 or 3 people that would work with you, and everything. You know, my mother was very involved in the business. My father, of course, was very involved in the business. And that was, you know, our life. We weren't very wealthy at all, but everything, you know, was around the family. And we had very few interruptions or distractions that anyways bothered me at that time. As I got older, of course, things changed. Absolutely, and they're wonderful. There's, well, I'll use, like, you know, there's Susan Jacobson, which was Susan Hansberry. There was Gail Kittler, who's now Gail, Hambly, you know. There was Peter Neese. There were probably a lot more girls than there were boys. Anyways, the girls have stuck around, the boys have sort of gone off. You know, there was Ann Shields, Terry Ann Rogers.
Barry Crawford?
Barry was, I think he was older than I am, but I'm not too sure. But Barry wasn't really an Osterville boy. I think he was a Centerville boy. And with Danny Hostetter, he was in my class. Of course, as I got into high school, then of course, you know, there was Marcel Poyant, and there was, you know, a lot of the other kids that I knew, and I'm still very friendly. We have our 61st. You know, we graduated in '61, and we still have every year now we have a reunion, and it's amazing how many show up. And that's from the whole high school, but a lot of them were from Osterville. It's really quite amazing. My father was an avid sailor, and he would drag me down to the water to go sailing. I was scared to death as a little kid sailing, because he would tip that thing so that the water was coming right in the gunnel, and he thought that was fun, but of course it scared the death out of me. Now I love doing it myself. I used to play, we could leave, especially in the summer. We would just go down to the boatyard, and I would spend all day there. And and Eddie Crosby sort of took me under his wing, and we would go out on the little tugboat that he had, the Admiral, and we would go around the island and we'd go over to the Mellons and we'd pick up boats, but he really took me under his wing, and we really had a wonderful time. And also his brother, Bookie Crosby, and I've been friends, because Ed is not with us anymore, and Bookie isn't either, just recently. But they were very, very good friends of mine. But then also I knew Malcolm Crosby. He was a year ahead of me in school, and his brother Teddy, and Gus, who just recently died. And they were all good friends. I mean, there weren't that many in any one grade, so if you were within 3 or 4 years of each other, you played. But I guess I might say we had such freedom. We just went during the day, and my mother was busy with the business, and I had 5 other siblings. I have a brother and 4 sisters, and they were all home. And as long as we were home for supper, because we all ate supper together, and it was supper, it wasn't dinner. And my mother would clear the dining room table off, all the bills and stuff that she was dealing with in the business, and she would sit us down. And my father, of course, was at the head of the table, and he got the biggest piece of pie and the best piece of meat. But he deserved it, But we never went hungry, ever went hungry. And I look back at it, I'm thinking about it more and more now. It was just so peaceful. We never had TV in our house, even until 1970, I think. My mother, we finally, as a bunch of kids, bought my mother and father a TV, but we never had TV. And my mother, who was a very well-educated person, she went to Boston University, graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. I've got her Phi Beta Kappa key. Never got below an A in her life. Went to school here in the town of Barnstable and graduated. As I say, went to Boston University, and her entire tuition for 4 years at Boston University, well, she went when she was 16 years old because she had skipped quite a few years because she was so bright, was $400. That was tuition, everything. My mother's maiden name was Parker, and basically we're connected quite closely with the Crockers and the Lovels and the Nickersons. My mother's relatives came down and settled in West Barnstable in Yarmouth in 1638, and the year before the town was incorporated. Her father was town clerk and treasurer of the town of Barnstable. He was I believe he was either MIT or Harvard graduate. I believe he was a Harvard graduate. And his father was also, Charlie Parker, was also town clerk and treasurer prior to him. And he sort of took it over when his father.
It goes back to the 40s and 30s?
No, this goes back to the turn of the century.
Really?
Yeah. He was, I believe, he stopped being town clerk and treasurer in 1906, I believe. That's Henry Parker. That's my mother's father. There was a divorce in the family, and her mother then took over as postmaster of Osterville, and held the post until those dirty Democrats came in. And I'm only kidding. But it was very political in those days, whether you're a postmaster or not. And so she had it, I believe she had it since I'd say 1908 or 9 to 1935, I think, is when Roosevelt came in, because it was pretty much a Republican regime all the way through.
Or your,
Well, my mother's brother, which was Stanton Parker, was not a historian, but a person who looks back into the history. Give me the name.
sure.
You know, and he has done a complete research on us and has got it all the way back actually to El Cid over in Europe. But we're directly related to 14 of the original Plymouth people that came over. Of course, we were part of what they call the Mayflower Foundation or whatever it is, the association. I'm not particularly a member at this particular time, but my mother and my uncle were, and so we do have that completely documented as to all the relations and how it works. I mean, I could bring it out, but it's a huge, you know, there's a big wheel, and it's quite a document. It's a very interesting story, and it's a real American story. My father was born in Kingston to parents that had come over from Germany just before the turn of this. My father was born in '02, and so I believe his folks came over in the early 1890s, which we have that documented too, but I'm really not up to date on it. But he came over and lived in Plymouth, and Kingston, Mass. And very, very, very poor. Lived in a German community. He had a sister. He actually had 3 sisters that moved to Osterville. And one was Tina Murray, and she married Jesse Murray, who was Johnny Farrington's grandfather, you know. And then he had another sister, which was Edna Riedell, which is Edna McGough, who, I don't know if you know Sheila McGough, or Sheila Thomas now. I mean, that's, you know, we're cousins. And then there was another sister, Mrs. Williams, that married a Williams that was an educator and a CPA in town, Frank Williams. And so those 3 were there. My father was younger, and he had a brother that was older. And he had another sister that she died of a drowning at one point. But anyway, so he followed his sister down to the Cape because there was no work in Kingston. They had the Plymouth Cottage Company, and that was about it. And so he came to Osterville, lived down on Fire Station Road in a tent, and decided, you know, that he wanted to stay. And so Jesse Murray, who was his brother-in-law, I guess, brother-in-law, his sister's husband, gave him a job of driving a taxi and a bus. So he used to drive. He had only gone to school through age 14. So he drove the bus to Barnstable from Osterville, picked up Centerville and anybody along the way. But the bus only went one way. So my father came over to Hyannis, had to stay here all day until the end of the day and then go back. So he said, well, why not go to school? So he came and he went to school here at Barnstable. And he actually drove my mother over here, never even knew her at the time. But so, you know, that's how he sort of almost finished his education. But then he wanted to get his high school diploma, so he had this Frank Williams, who was his brother-in-law, was very much on education. He kept telling my father, you've got to get an education. You've got to get an education. So we went up to Boston and went to Northeastern Prep and got his his diploma, high school diploma. And then he decided he wanted to go into plumbing. So this was in the late 20s. And so we went to Wentworth, believe it or not, and got he worked at Boston City Hospital in the morgue, and he always used to tell me I used to sell rotten chickens down on the streets of Boston, in the open air markets. But he scraped his way through, and and he got his master's plumber's license at Wentworth. Never finished Wentworth because I think he got his license in March, and he said, I don't have to finish school because I've got the master plumber's license. So he came down, and he was doing fairly well. And so he came to the Cape and worked for G.W. Hallett. There was a plumbing firm in Austell. It was the biggest plumbing firm around the area. And they dealt with all the houses down on the beach. And but then, of course, the Depression came and was let go. So we really had nothing to do. So he said, I got to go into business for myself, and so he did. And I think the first house he ever built was, you probably know this name, Alan Frazier's house, which was David Frazier was his son, and his wife was a teacher in the Austell School for many, many years. And so he did that, and then he did the Oyster Harbor's pro shop, and then he went on, and it grew from there. But my father, thought very highly of education. He wasn't really what you'd call an educated person, but he knew the value of it. And so he always told us, there was never a doubt in our mind that of all the 6 of us children, that we were all going to go to college. There wasn't a question. And that he would, one way or another, afford to do it. And so he really didn't, with smarts of my mother, running the books and controlling my father, and him doing the work, it was a wonderful team, and this is how the business started and grew to what it is today. I think my first job was in the business when I was about 10. I don't know, have you ever heard of the guy named Joe Cronin? Yeah. He had a house in Austerville. Right. And he was way down close to the water, and the town water was way up close to the street. And my father said, it was me and Billy McAvoy. He said, take your buddy, and here's 2 shovels. I want you to dig a trench from the water main up at the street all the way down to Joe Cronin's house. And I'll give you 50 cents an hour. We thought we were rich. And so we did it. I mean, it wasn't the greatest trench in the world, and it curved, and I don't think it's still in the ground. But we did it, and that was the first, I think, paying job I did with my father. And from then on, I worked for him, and I worked for Reed's nursery over in Marston's Mills. And those were really the only 2 jobs I had. It was for my father and for this nursery company that I can think of. Of course, I was in the service, which was another job. And while I was going to college, I had little jobs in 7-Elevens and stuff like that in order to make some money and pump gas. Well, I don't know of a better place to come back to be very honest with you. No, but I mean, I was a very difficult child because I went to many schools. I went through the 7th grade in the Barnstable system, and then my parents, I wasn't doing too well, and my behavior was not the greatest. So they sent me to Cheshire Academy down in Connecticut. I went to a summer school there, and I did very well at summer school. And then I did I believe the 7th grade there. And I was sort of a bad boy, and so they asked me not to come back. And so I did come back, and I went to like the 8th, 9th, 10th grades at Barnstable. And And I went into when I was in the 10th grade, what they would do, the teachers would just basically give me the newspaper and say, go read it in the back. And that's what I would do. I wasn't very into education. And so the guidance counselor at the time, Al Lawson, said, Carl, I think you better go down to the plumbing school. And I had nothing against plumbing, but I thought I had a better aptitude than to do that. So I went to my father and I said, Dad, you got to send me away somewhere. And he didn't even question it. He said, okay. So my sister had married Norman Levinson, whose father was Doc Levinson, who was the guidance counselor in Yarmouth, and he was also a guidance counselor here at Barnstable when the school first moved over there to West Main Street. And so they sent me away to a military school down in Virginia. My parents never went there. They put me on a bus and they said, go. And 4 years later, I graduated and I did very well. I was motivated. There was nothing I could do other than wear a uniform. Everything was by the numbers, and it was the best thing for me. And of course, I graduated from there. I went to New England College in Henniker, New Hampshire for a year. I didn't like it at all because there wasn't enough structure, I didn't think, because I needed structure. So I went to Drexel Institute of Technology, now it's called Drexel University, in Philadelphia, and really loved it. I went through the whole program, a 5-year program in 3 years, and did very well. And I got my ROTC commission from both going to military prep school and in the military and college. And I got married to my wife Sharon. We've been married 48 years, and then went to infantry officers basic school down in Fort Benning, Georgia, and then from there right to Alaska, and spent 2 years in Alaska, from 68 to 70. Very fortunate I didn't have to go overseas. Oh, they considered it overseas, Alaska. But it was, and I got paid for being overseas. But I had a wonderful 2-year tour up there. And then my father called me one day and he says, are you going to take the business over? Because I had worked with him every summer, and a lot. I had taken a lot of interest. My brother had absolutely no interest in the business. He said, are you interested in coming home? And he sort of put me on the spot, and I said, Dad, I think I will. I want to do it. And he says, well, if you don't, he says, I'm going to sell it and give it to somebody else. And that really, I said, you're not going to give this business away. I'm going to come home. And that sort of got, so I came home in June of 1970, and I've been plumbing ever since. I got all my licenses, and it was a fairly easy thing for me to do. My son Guy, his name is Carl. My father's name was Carl Francis. I'm Carl Schaefer, and my son is Carl Anthony. So there's no junior involved, or the first, second, or third. We wanted to keep it that way. And if he ever has a son, hopefully it'll be Carl Parker. It's doing very well. It's doing very well, better than I ever could have dreamed. And it's always funny, every generation does it differently. And when I came home and I took it over, my mother said, how could you just take over a business when you really haven't ever done that before? And but it's all your education, in the generation. And the same with my son. My son took over from where I was, which I thought we were doing pretty good, and he's gone way beyond what I would ever imagine. And and it's a good quality business, and I think we're pretty well respected in the community. And so it's always we believe in giving back to the community. My son believes in giving back to the community. He's doing a lot with Big Brother, Big Sister, and other things, and similar to what I did. And we love the community. That's where I met Gary. That's where I met Richard Clark. That's where I knew Bobby Jones to some extent. But there were, and that's, of course, Roy Richardson was involved then, and Greg Greg Milne was on board, and Audrey you know, I met people that I had never met before, and to be honest with you, I'm still very friendly with them. You know, I'm sorry, you know, Richard Clark's not with us anymore, but he was a very good friend. Bob Jones was a very good friend. Roy's a very good friend. Gary Blazes is a very good friend. I thought we had, you know, Bob Smith, who was the town council, I thought he was phenomenal. It was just fun working with people in something that's other than plumbing, and hopefully we would do something good for the town. And, you know, we tried. Well, there's no question about that. Osterville is very nice, and I like the village, the community. When I was a young kid, Osterville was nice, but it's nowhere near as beautiful as it is today. You know, and I think that it has gotten better and better and better. You know, something happened in Osterville that didn't happen in the other communities, I feel. And one of the best things that ever happened to Osterville was that, of course, it had its center, but Route 28 didn't come through. Route 28 was designed to come through Osterville, and the bounds are there. The highway bounds are still there today, but they didn't, and they cut off and went, you know, down the middle of the Cape, down through, out in the Centerville Woods, which was, when I was a kid, that was just woods, and you know, from Hyannis down, and it didn't go through the villages, and that's what I think saved Osterville. And then also the second thing was that there was a time back in the, I think, very early 60s when they were thinking of putting motels in Osterville. When the old Crosby House, which was the Osterville Manor, was torn down, they wanted to build a motel there, you know, sort of and it thank God it didn't happen. And then there have been very influential people, I think, in the village that has kept the village pristine the way it is. Helen McClellan, who was the real estate agent, or the real estate agent in Osterville back in the 50s, really controlled who came into the village. I mean, it wouldn't be allowed today, but you know, and that's fine, because I think the village is better, but it doesn't have some of the amenities that would bring in transients. And so it's more of a residential village than I think maybe some parts of Centerville and Hyannis are. You know, and it does have a nice center. They are living here right now, all of them. There's three and a step-grandchild. Yeah, and they live in, they all live in Masters Mills, you know, and they really enjoy it. And, you know, we can see them quite often. And, but they don't have the freedom that I had when I was a kid. You know, they didn't have Mystic Lake Farm to go to, or Alto's Farm to go to, or, you know, the horse stables over on Little Island, you know, just all the little, or the boat yards, you know, that you were able to wander and roam. Kids just don't have things that stretch their imagination like I think mine was. It's still a good town, and it will always be a good town, I think. And as long as you allow the people to run the town, because they're not going to do something that is going to, I mean, I find this, you know, we try to shovel people to go one direction because we think that's the best direction. And it's not always the best direction. So I think individuality, this is where, like, if you go to California, every house looks the same. You drive through Osterville or Centerville or anywhere in the town of Barnstable, and there's hardly a development where there's the sameness. You know, I mean, Centerville is a great example. You know, you get all different types of houses, sizes, and it creates something that they're trying to create when they make everything the same. And this is what I like, and I would certainly hope, you know, we all love what Cape Cod used to be, But you know, if you tried to build it today, rules and regulations would not allow you to do it. I mean, you couldn't put an oyster shanty right on the shore of, you know, by the bridge over there in Oswald going over the little island. You know, some of these beautiful scenes. Or you couldn't have Baxter's anywhere, you know, out here. Or you couldn't have the Matakees or whatever over there in Barnstable. You know, we wouldn't be allowed to do that because we would be hurting the environment. But this is what brings people to our area, something that would be illegal today. You know, so I think we've got to allow people to use their imagination, and they will if you give them the opportunity. My name is Carl Riedell. I live in Osterville, and I hope to die here.